Okay, imagine a time when your pharmacy wasn't on the street corner but was actually in your kitchen pantry. We're going to travel back over 100 years to 1908 to check out this incredible guide that promised to cure you, not with pills, but with things like pineapples and onions. So, our guide for this little trip is this fascinating book right here. It's called Food Remedies, and it was published way back in London by a woman named Florence Daniel. And it's so much more than just a book. It's basically a time capsule that gives us a direct window into what people thought about health in the early 20th century. So, just put yourself in that mindset for a second. It's 1908. You've got a nagging cough, maybe a fever, or even a really painful case of gout. Antibiotics? They're still decades away. All those complex pharmaceuticals we have now just don't exist. So where do you turn? Well, according to Florence Daniel, the answer was right there in your kitchen. All right, so here's how we're going to break this down. First, we'll get to know the guide itself. Then we'll dive into its core belief, the kind of radical power of fruit. From there, we'll open up its cabinet of some pretty surprising cures, and we'll step into the kitchen pharmacy to see how they were actually made. And then finally, we'll connect it all back to some of the wellness trends we see today. So let's start with the guide itself and, the woman who actually wrote this really fascinating text. So Florence Daniel, she wasn't a doctor in the way we'd think of one today. She said she drew her inspiration from two main places, my grandmother and Culpeper's Herbal, which was this famous 17th century book on herbal medicine. Her whole goal was to prove that simple, natural foods were way better than the complex remedies of the time. It was all part of this growing movement she called the simple life. And that simple life philosophy? Well, it leads us right to the core idea of her entire book, the incredible, almost magical power of fruit. This is literally the very first line of the book, and it's so powerful in its simplicity. While there is life and fruit, there is hope. I mean, that's not just a catchy phrase, is it? It's a full-on declaration of faith in nature's ability to heal. For Daniel, fruit wasn't just food. It was a symbol of hope, a symbol of recovery. And this belief was really built on a key distinction she made. Daniel argued that natural foods had this, quote, mysterious life force that drugs made in a lab could never, ever replicate. The way she saw it, taking mineral drugs directly was a violation of nature's law. Plants process minerals from the earth, and we humans are supposed to get them from the plants. Simple as that. So what about the big worry, right? That all that fruit acid would just rot your teeth. Well, Daniel tackles this one head on. She claimed that, far from being harmful, these natural acids were actually antiseptic. She said they didn't attack your enamel. They actually destroyed the germs that caused decay in the first place. She even suggested that nothing cleanses the teeth better than a juicy apple. Okay, now for the really fun part. Let's take a look inside the book's so-called Cabinet of Cures. This is where we see her philosophy get put into practice. And believe me, there are some truly astonishing recommendations in here. I mean, just take this claim, for example. The book declares pineapple juice as the specific for diphtheria. The idea was that the juice was corrosive enough that it could dissolve the dangerous membrane that forms in your throat when you have the illness, but at the same time, be completely harmless to healthy tissue. What a truly incredible claim. And the language she uses is just fantastic. The walnut is called vegetable arsenic. Now, before you panic, she didn't mean it literally. It was a comparison she used to highlight its perceived power in treating skin diseases. So you'd apply an oil from the kernel on the outside, and you'd eat the nuts on the inside. Onions were seen as this dual threat marvel. Internally, the juice was used for pretty much everything, from bronchitis to insomnia. But here's the wild part. Externally, if you placed a cut onion in a sick room, it was believed to act like a magnet, literally attracting disease germs out of the air and drawing corruption into itself. And the sheer range of these claims is just stunning. The humble apple wasn't just for, good health. No, it was prescribed for brain fag, which is basically mental exhaustion, and even inebriation. Grapes were recommended for everything from overeating to smallpox. So, you see, this wasn't just a random collection of tips. It was presented as a complete system of medicine. Okay, so we've seen the what and the why. But how are these remedies actually prepared? Let's step into what the book basically describes as Grandma's Kitchen Pharmacy. Here's a perfect example for you.
Raisin tea. This wasn't just a pleasant drink, it was considered a restorative tonic for people who were weak and ill. The book actually notes that when you make it with these exact proportions, it has the same protein value as milk but is way more easily digested. So it was ideal for, gastric complaints.
And for Florence Daniel, this belief was deeply personal. She shares this incredible story from when she was just an infant, claiming she was on the brink of death from bronchitis. And what saved her? She wrote that it was a simple poultice of pounded onions applied to the soles of her feet. It's a story that really shows you the profound trust people placed in these remedies. And the pharmacy was stocked with all sorts of practical cures. Got a burn? Scrape a raw potato. A sprain? Crush some caraway seeds. From blackberry for diarrhea to coconut for intestinal worms, pretty much every single item in the pantry had a potential medicinal use. Okay, so finally, let's connect the dots. You might be thinking these ideas are just, historical curiosities. But actually, many of them have some really striking parallels in our modern wellness culture. The parallels really are striking. The 1908 grape cure for overindulgence, it sounds a whole lot like a modern juice cleanse, doesn't it? The call for a simple life is totally echoed in today's minimalism movement, and that skepticism of mineral drugs from the lab, well, that has a clear descendant in the modern preference for natural remedies. The language has changed for sure, but the core ideas are surprisingly persistent.
And all of this kind of makes you wonder, right? What wellness trends that we take for granted today will seem just as curious and quaint to people 100 years from now? What cures from our time are going to be the curiosities of the future? It's definitely something to think about.